A man stood quietly beside a luxury car. He wore the crisp black uniform of a chauffeur, and his posture was still respectful. At this grand wedding with guests in sparkling gowns and sharp tuxedos, he was treated like a part of the scenery, invisible. But a moment was coming that would make him the center of everyone's world. The bride, a vision in white, sneered in his direction. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at him, and her voice cut through the air like glass. "Park far, you smell," she commanded. A ripple of cruel laughter went through the crowd. Her friends giggled, enjoying his public humiliation. But what nobody knew was the secret he held. He wasn't just the driver. He was the millionaire owner of that very car. And he was the groom's lifelong benefactor, the man who had raised him. And when the truth finally came out, right there in front of the entire wedding party, jaws would drop, faces would turn pale, and the bride would regret every single word she had said. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story already has you hooked, smash that like button, because what's about to happen will leave you stunned. The sun was high and bright, casting a golden glow over the immaculate lawns of the Crestwood Manor. It was the kind of day that wedding planners dreamed of. Guests, dressed in their finest, moved like a river of silk and satin toward the grand entrance. Laughter floated on the warm afternoon breeze, mixing with the gentle sounds of a string quartet playing somewhere in the distance. A sleek black sedan, so polished it reflected the blue sky like a dark mirror, pulled up to the front steps. The engine purred so softly it was almost silent. The man in the driver's seat, Marcus Reed, stepped out. He was a man in his 40s, with a calm, steady presence. He wore a simple, well-pressed chauffeur's uniform. It was clean and professional, but in a place like this, it made him invisible. He walked around to the passenger side, his movements efficient and practiced. He opened the door with a quiet grace. Out stepped Ethan Parker, the groom. He was young, his face a mixture of excitement and nerves. He adjusted his bow tie, his eyes scanning the crowd for his bride. Then, from the other side of the car, Amanda Sterling emerged. She was breathtaking in her white gown, a cascade of lace and pearls. But the beauty of her dress was overshadowed by the look on her face. Her lips were curled into a disdainful sneer. Her eyes, cold and sharp, landed on Marcus. She wrinkled her nose, a theatrical gesture of disgust meant for everyone to see. "Ugh," she said, her voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear clearly. She pointed a finger directly at Marcus. "You," she snapped. "Park the car far away. You smell." A sudden, sharp silence fell over the courtyard. The string quartet seemed to falter. A few guests gasped, their smiles frozen on their faces. Amanda's bridesmaids, a cluster of women in matching pastel dresses, tried to stifle their giggles. They failed. Their laughter was high and thin, a cruel sound that echoed in the sudden quiet. Marcus did not react. His face remained a mask of calm professionalism. He did not flinch. He did not scowl. He simply stood there, his dignity a silent shield against her words. Inside, however, he felt a familiar, weary pang. He had seen this kind of arrogance before, many times. He had just never expected to see it directed at him by the woman who was about to marry the boy he considered a son. Ethan's face turned red. He looked horrified. "Amanda," he whispered, stepping toward her. "Don't say that." "That's Marcus." He wanted to say more, to explain who Marcus was, but Amanda cut him off with a flick of her hand. "Don't be ridiculous, Ethan," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "He's the driver. It's his job to stay out of sight. I don't want the whole place stinking of his cheap cologne." She turned her back on Marcus as if he had already ceased to exist. She linked her arm through Ethan's, pulling him toward the entrance. "Come on, darling, everyone is waiting for us. It's our big day." Ethan looked back over his shoulder, his eyes meeting Marcus's for a brief, apologetic moment. But he was swept away by Amanda and her entourage, swallowed by the crowd of well-wishers who were pretending they hadn't heard a thing. A waitress named Sophie Lane, holding a tray of champagne flutes, stood frozen near a stone pillar. She had seen the whole thing. Her mouth was slightly open in disbelief. The cruelty of the bride's words had been so casual, so public. She watched as Marcus gave a slight formal nod to no one in particular. He closed the car door with a soft click. The sound seemed to break the spell that had fallen over the courtyard. Conversation started up again, a little too loudly. Guests turned away, eager to forget the uncomfortable moment. Sophie's eyes followed Marcus as he got back into the driver's seat. He didn't look angry or hurt. He just looked patient. As the beautiful, expensive car pulled away, she felt a knot of anger tighten in her stomach. The bride was beautiful. The venue was perfect, but the whole day suddenly felt ugly. She looked at the smirking faces of Amanda's friends and knew this was a side of wealth she would never understand. The humiliation had been delivered like a swift, clean blow, and the silence of the crowd had been its own form of applause. Marcus drove the car away from the grand entrance, his hands steady on the steering wheel. He followed the winding path that led to the guest parking lot, a sprawling area far from the main building. Amanda's words echoed in his ears, not because they hurt him, but because of what they revealed. "Park far, you smell." He found a spot at the farthest edge of the lot under the shade of a large oak tree, just as he had been ordered. He turned off the engine, and the luxurious interior of the car fell silent. From this distance, the wedding party was just a collection of colorful dots moving against the backdrop of the stone manor. Inside the venue, Amanda was holding court. She was surrounded by her bridesmaids, her laughter bright and brittle. "Can you believe the nerve?" she said, recounting the incident with dramatic flair. He just stood there staring. People like that should be kept out of sight on a day like this. It's about standards. Her friends nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting her own casual cruelty. Sophie, the waitress, was refilling champagne glasses nearby. She kept her head down, but she heard every word. Each one felt like a small stone being dropped into a deep well of injustice. She saw Ethan standing off to the side, looking deeply uncomfortable. He approached Amanda, his brow furrowed with concern. "Amanda, maybe you should have been a bit kinder," he said in a low voice. "He's an old friend of my family." Amanda waved a dismissive hand, the diamonds on her ring flashing in the light. "Oh, Ethan, don't be so dramatic. He's the hired help. It's our wedding day. The only thing that matters is that everything is perfect." She leaned in and kissed his cheek, a quick, possessive gesture that was meant to end the conversation. "Now smile." My father is about to give his speech. Ethan looked defeated. He wanted to press the issue, to defend the man who had done so much for him, but the momentum of the day was too strong. He let himself be pulled back into the celebration, the conflict warring inside him. Meanwhile, back in the car, Marcus stared out at the distant manor. He wasn't thinking about the insult. He was thinking about a promise he had made years ago to a dying friend. He had promised to look after his son, Ethan. He had funded Ethan's education, mentored him in business, and tried to teach him the values that truly mattered: humility, integrity, and respect for all people, regardless of their station in life. This car wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of that journey. It was a wedding gift, a way to give Ethan and his new wife a strong start. He had spent weeks choosing it, a custom model with features he knew Ethan would love. He had wanted to give it to him personally, to see the look on his face. The chauffeur's uniform had been part of the plan, a humble surprise, a final lesson about not judging a book by its cover. The irony was bitter. The disguise had worked, just not in the way he had intended. It had revealed a truth, but it was the ugly truth about his son's chosen bride. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a simple, elegant envelope. Inside were the keys and the official ownership documents, all in Ethan Parker's name. A silent wound had been inflicted not on his pride, but on his hope for Ethan's future. He sat there for a long time, the silence of the car a stark contrast to the hollow celebration happening just a few hundred yards away. His restraint was not weakness, it was a gathering storm. To the guests at the wedding, Marcus Reed was just a chauffeur. A man paid to be invisible, to open doors and follow orders. His simple black uniform was a costume of servitude, designed to blend into the background. But the reality of Marcus's life was a world away from the assumptions people made based on his appearance. He was not a simple driver. He was a self-made millionaire, a titan in the automotive and real estate industries. His story was one of grit, determination, and quiet brilliance. He had started with nothing, just a small, run-down auto repair shop he inherited from his father. While other people saw a dead-end business, Marcus saw potential. He worked day and night, his hands calloused and greasy, learning every nut and bolt of the trade. He didn't just fix cars, he understood them. More importantly, he understood people. He treated every customer with respect, whether they were driving a rusted-out pickup or a brand-new luxury sedan. His reputation for honesty and quality work spread, and his small shop grew. He saved every penny he earned, living modestly while his business expanded. He bought another garage, then another. He had a natural instinct for business, a keen eye for good investments. He started buying the land his garages were on, then the properties next to them. Before long, he owned a string of successful car dealerships across the state and a portfolio of commercial real estate that was the envy of seasoned investors. He never forgot where he came from. He still enjoyed the simple satisfaction of working on an engine, the smell of oil and steel. He moved in circles of immense wealth, but he never adopted the arrogance that so often came with it. He preferred a simple suit to designer labels and a quiet conversation to a lavish party. His connection to Ethan Parker was forged in tragedy. Ethan's father, David, had been Marcus's best friend. They had grown up together, two ambitious kids from a poor neighborhood who dreamed of making something of themselves. David had been the one who loaned Marcus the small amount of money he needed to keep his father's shop from going under. It was a debt Marcus never forgot. Years later, when David fell ill with a sudden and aggressive cancer, Marcus was by his side. In his final days, David made Marcus promise one thing. "Look after my boy, Marcus. Look after Ethan. Teach him to be a good man." Marcus took that promise to heart. After David passed away, he became a silent guardian in Ethan's life. He wasn't a formal stepfather, but he was a constant, steady presence. He paid for Ethan's private school tuition, making sure the payments were funneled through an anonymous trust so the boy wouldn't feel like a charity case. He funded Ethan's college education, covering every expense from tuition to books to living costs. When Ethan graduated and wanted to start his own small graphic design business, Marcus provided the seed money, framing it as a long-term, low-interest loan from a family friend's investment firm. He mentored Ethan, teaching him about business, finance, and most importantly, character. He taught him that wealth wasn't about what you owned, but about who you were. The car Amanda had mocked him over was the culmination of that promise. It was a custom-ordered luxury sedan, a model he knew Ethan had admired for years. It wasn't just a display of wealth. It was a tool for Ethan's future. It was safe, reliable, and professional. A car that would help his son build his own life, his own success. Marcus had paid for it in full. A six-figure sum he didn't even have to think twice about. The ownership papers, tucked neatly inside the envelope in the glove compartment, were already signed over to Ethan Parker. The audience at the wedding saw a driver being told he smelled. The universe saw a father figure, a secret millionaire, and a powerful benefactor being insulted by the very person he was trying to help. The secret was his, a quiet power waiting to be revealed. And as he sat in that car, the engine silent, he knew the moment for that revelation was drawing closer. The chauffeur disguise had been a deliberate choice, born from a lesson Marcus wanted to impart. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, he had thought long and hard about the perfect gift. He could have simply wired money into Ethan's account or had the car delivered by a dealership employee. But that felt impersonal. hollow. It would have been just another expensive present, easily forgotten. Marcus wanted to give Ethan something more valuable than a car. He wanted to give him a story, a memory that would serve as a moral compass for the rest of his life. He had seen how easily young people, especially those who married into wealth, could lose their way. He had seen them become obsessed with status, with appearances, with the very things that Amanda Sterling seemed to worship. He worried about Ethan. He had a good heart, but he was young and in love, and Marcus knew that love could sometimes be blind. So, he devised a plan. He would deliver the car himself, dressed not as a millionaire benefactor, but as a humble driver. He imagined the scene. He would drive Ethan and Amanda to their wedding, perform his duties with quiet professionalism, and then, at the reception, he would hand over the keys. The reveal would be a surprise, a moment of joy and disbelief. But more than that, it would be a powerful reminder for Ethan that the man who opens your door and the man who signs your checks can be one and the same. That true worth is not determined by a uniform or a job title. He wanted Ethan to see firsthand how the world treated people based on their perceived status. He wanted to start a conversation with him after the wedding about kindness, respect, and the importance of seeing the humanity in everyone. The plan was rooted in his own life experience. He remembered the sting of being dismissed, of being underestimated because of the grease under his fingernails or the simple clothes he wore. He had built his empire on the foundation of treating everyone with dignity, and he desperately wanted that value to be a cornerstone of Ethan's new family. The irony was almost painful. His test, designed to be a gentle lesson for Ethan, had instead become a spotlight, illuminating the deep-seated cruelty in Amanda. He had wanted to show Ethan the importance of humility, but Amanda had used the opportunity to display her boundless arrogance. He had hoped for a moment of quiet reflection, and she had created a scene of public humiliation. As he sat in the driver's seat, the uniform feeling heavier than it had before, he realized his plan had not failed. It had succeeded, just in a way he had never anticipated. It had revealed a character flaw so profound, so rotten at its core, that it couldn't be ignored. He had wanted to give Ethan a lesson in humility. Now he feared he would have to give him a much harsher lesson, a lesson about the true nature of the woman he had just pledged to spend his life with. The disguise was no longer about a surprise gift. It was about exposing a truth that Ethan desperately needed to see before it was too late. Marcus looked at the envelope on the passenger seat. The plan had changed, but the objective was the same: to protect the boy he had promised to raise as his own. Sophie Lane couldn't shake the image from her mind. The bride's cruel words, the bridesmaid's mocking laughter, and the driver's unshakable calm. As she moved through the reception hall, clearing plates and refilling glasses, she felt a growing sense of unease. The whole event felt like a performance. The smiles on the guests' faces seemed forced, the laughter a little too loud. It was as if everyone was trying to pretend they hadn't witnessed that ugly moment in the courtyard. But Sophie had seen it, and she couldn't pretend. She was a student working this catering job to pay her tuition. She had seen her fair share of wealthy, entitled people, but Amanda's behavior was on another level. It was a casual, thoughtless cruelty that spoke volumes about her character. During a lull in the service, Sophie found herself near the back entrance, looking out toward the parking lot. She could see the black sedan parked under the distant oak tree. On an impulse, she grabbed 2 bottles of cold water from the service bar and slipped out the door. She walked across the manicured lawn, her simple black uniform a stark contrast to the finery of the wedding guests. She felt a little nervous, unsure of what she would say. What could she say? Sorry, my boss's new daughter-in-law is a terrible person. She found Marcus sitting in the driver's seat, the window down. He was staring out at the horizon, his expression thoughtful. He didn't seem surprised to see her approach. He simply turned his head and gave her a small, polite nod. "Excuse me," Sophie said, her voice a little shaky. I brought you some water. It's a hot day." Marcus looked at the bottles in her hand, then up at her face. He saw the genuine concern in her eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice calm and even. "That's very kind of you." He took one of the bottles, and the simple exchange felt more genuine than any of the practiced pleasantries she had heard all day. "I saw what happened earlier," Sophie blurted out, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "With the bride. I wanted to say I'm so sorry. That was awful. No one should be treated like that." She felt her cheeks flush, worried she had overstepped her bounds. Marcus took a slow sip of water. He studied her for a moment, a flicker of appreciation in his eyes. "You have a good heart," he said simply. "Don't ever lose that." Sophie felt a knot of frustration in her chest. "Someone should say something to her," she said, her voice filled with a sense of righteous anger. Someone should tell her how disgusting her behavior was. She debated, for a fleeting moment, what would happen if she marched back into that reception and confronted Amanda herself. She would surely be fired, but maybe it would be worth it. Marcus seemed to read her thoughts. He shook his head gently. "Sometimes," he said, his voice low and measured, "silence holds more power than shouting. Let people reveal who they are by their own actions. The truth has a way of coming out, all on its own." His words were calm, but they carried an immense weight. It wasn't the advice of a victim. It was the strategy of a man who was in complete control. Sophie understood then that he wasn't just sitting here feeling sorry for himself. He was waiting. She looked from his steady gaze back toward the grand manor, where the party was in full swing. A different kind of drama was unfolding, and she had just met one of the main actors. "Well," she said, "if you need anything, just let me know." Marcus gave her a warm, genuine smile. "I will. Thank you, Sophie." As she walked back to the reception hall, she felt a strange sense of anticipation. The driver had called her by her name, though she had never told it to him. She realized he was far more observant than anyone gave him credit for. He was right. The truth was coming out, and for the first time that day, she felt a flicker of hope that justice would be served. Inside the opulent reception hall, Amanda Sterling was the queen of her own universe. The earlier incident with the driver had only served to inflate her already massive ego. Surrounded by her fawning bridesmaids, she held up her champagne flute, the crystals sparkling under the chandeliers. "A toast," she declared, her voice ringing with self-satisfaction, "to a perfect day, and to making sure the little people know their place." Her friends giggled and clinked their glasses against hers. One of them, a blonde named Jessica, leaned in conspiratorially. "I can't believe he just stood there," she whispered. "If looks could kill, he would have—" Amanda laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Please," she scoffed. "He's lucky I didn't have him fired on the spot. Can you imagine the smell? It would have ruined the whole aesthetic." Her father, Mr. Dalton, a portly man with a face flushed from expensive wine, approached the group. He was a man who measured worth in dollars and cents, and he had raised his daughter to do the same. "There's my beautiful girl," he boomed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Amanda preened under his attention. "Daddy, did you hear what I did?" she asked, her voice like a spoiled child's. "I put that smelly driver in his place. I told him to park far away so he wouldn't bother us." Mr. Dalton chuckled, a low, rumbling sound of approval. "That's my Amanda," he said, patting her shoulder. "Never let anyone disrespect you. You're a Sterling now. Well, a Parker, but you'll always be my Sterling." He saw no irony in his words. To him, demanding respect and showing it were two entirely different concepts. The conversation drifted to the wedding gifts. Amanda made a great show of talking about the expensive presents her side of the family had given. "Aunt Carol gave us a check that could buy a small car," she bragged. "And Daddy, of course, has been so generous." She shot a pointed look across the room at Ethan's family, a small, modest group of people who looked slightly overwhelmed by the lavish surroundings. Ethan's side is sweet, she said, her tone making the word sound like an insult. I think his aunt knitted us a blanket. She rolled her eyes, and her friends tittered in response. She lowered her voice, but not so low that the nearby guests couldn't hear. It's a good thing I'm marrying him for love, she said with a sly wink, because he certainly doesn't have any money. We'll be living off my trust fund for years. A few of the older guests shifted uncomfortably. The nervous laughter that followed her comments was strained. The tension in the room was beginning to thicken, a stark contrast to the festive decorations. Amanda was oblivious. She was so wrapped up in her own performance, so emboldened by the laughter of her sycophantic friends, that she didn't notice the shifting mood. She didn't see the disapproving glances from some of her own family members. She didn't see the way Ethan's mother flinched when she mentioned his lack of wealth. She saw only what she wanted to see. A crowd of admirers, a perfect wedding, and a world that revolved entirely around her. Her arrogance was a fire, burning brightly, and she had no idea that it was about to consume everything she held dear. Every word she spoke was another nail in the coffin of her own happiness, and she was hammering them in with a triumphant smile. Ethan stood near the grand fireplace, a glass of untouched champagne in his hand. He was trying to smile, to play the part of the happy groom, but a heavy knot of anxiety was tightening in his stomach. He had seen the exchange between Amanda and Marcus in the courtyard. He had felt the sting of her words, as if they had been directed at him. Marcus was more than just a family friend. He was the closest thing Ethan had to a father. The man had guided him, supported him, and believed in him when no one else did. To hear Amanda speak to him with such venomous disdain was like a physical blow. He had tried to let it go, to tell himself it was just wedding day stress, that Amanda didn't mean it. But then he overheard her, bragging to her friends. I put that driver in his place. The casual cruelty, the pride she took in her own meanness, made his blood run cold. He watched her now, holding court, her laughter echoing through the hall. He saw the way she dismissed his family's gifts, the way she belittled his financial situation. He loved her, or at least he thought he did. He loved her beauty, her confidence, her sharp wit. But in this moment, under the bright lights of their wedding reception, he was seeing a side of her he had never seen before, or perhaps a side he had chosen to ignore. He walked over to her, determined to make her understand. Amanda, we need to talk, he said, his voice low but firm. She turned to him, her smile faltering slightly at his serious expression. What is it, darling? Can't it wait? No, he said. It's about Marcus. What you said to him was unacceptable, and what you're saying now, it's not right. Amanda's eyes narrowed. The playful mood vanished, replaced by a cold defensiveness. Are you seriously doing this right now? She hissed, keeping her voice down so the nearby guests couldn't hear their argument. Are you defending the help over your own wife on our wedding day? He's not the help, Ethan insisted, his frustration growing. He's Marcus Reed. He's been a part of my life for 20 years. He's family. Amanda let out a short, incredulous laugh. Family? Ethan, he's a driver. My father hires and fires men like him every day. You're being overly sentimental. Now, stop making a scene. People are watching. She tried to take his arm, to pull him back into the celebration, but he stood his ground. This isn't a scene, he said, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disappointment. This is about respect. The way you talk about people, the way you look down on them. It's not who I am. It's not what I want in my life. For the first time, a flicker of genuine alarm crossed Amanda's face. She saw that he was serious, but her fear was quickly replaced by her ingrained arrogance. You knew who I was when you proposed, she said, her voice turning to ice. Don't you dare try to change me now. especially not for some insignificant old man. The word insignificant struck Ethan like a slap. Insignificant? The man who had paid for his education? The man who had given him the money to start his business, the man who had taught him how to be a man. He looked at Amanda, at her beautiful cold face, and for the first time he felt a chasm opening between them. He loved her, but he respected Marcus. And in that moment, he realized that Amanda was forcing him to choose between the two. The conflict was tearing him apart. He felt trapped, caught between the woman he was about to build a future with and the man who had made that future possible. He didn't know what to do, but he knew he couldn't let this go. The foundation of his new life was cracking before it had even set. Alone in the quiet sanctuary of the luxury car, Marcus Reed made a decision. The time for silent observation was over. The time for action had come. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. It was a simple, unassuming device, not the latest flashy model. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. David Chen. David was his most trusted assistant, a man of unparalleled efficiency and discretion. The phone rang only once before David answered. "Mr. Reed," he said, his voice calm and professional. There was no surprise, no questioning why his boss was calling him on a Saturday. "David," Marcus said, his own voice steady and precise, "I need you to do something for me. I am at the Crestwood Manor for Mr. Parker's wedding." "Yes, sir." "Congratulations to Mr. Parker," David replied. "Thank you," Marcus said. "I need you to go to the main office." In the top drawer of my desk, there is a large, sealed manila envelope. Inside that envelope are several documents. One is the official title and registration for a black sedan, model number. Marcus rattled off the vehicle identification number from memory. The others are financial statements and a portfolio summary. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, just the faint sound of a keyboard clicking as David took notes. "I understand, sir," he said. "Bring that envelope to me here at the manor," Marcus continued. "Come to the main reception hall. Do not ask for me by name. Ask the event coordinator to announce that a special delivery has arrived for the groom, Ethan Parker. Hand the envelope directly to the MC on stage. You are to say nothing else. Just deliver the package and leave." "Consider it done, Mr. Reed," David said without a moment's hesitation. "What is your estimated time of arrival?" Marcus asked. "Traffic is light." "I can be there in 45 minutes, sir." "Excellent," Marcus said. "Thank you, David." He ended the call. He placed the phone on the passenger seat. The stage was now being set. The car, which Amanda had so carelessly dismissed, was no longer just a gift. It was a symbol. It was evidence. And the documents David was bringing were the supporting facts. He wasn't acting out of anger or a desire for revenge. This was not about punishing Amanda. It was about saving Ethan. He needed to show Ethan, in a way that was undeniable, the truth of the situation. He needed to arm him with the full picture so he could make his own choice, free from the glittering illusions Amanda had so carefully constructed. The phone call had taken less than a minute, but it had irrevocably altered the course of the day. The quiet chauffeur, parked in the farthest corner of the lot, had just set in motion a chain of events that would bring the entire elaborate party to a screeching halt. The storm was no longer gathering. It was about to break. The reception hall was a swirl of activity. Waiters moved silently through the crowd, their trays laden with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The string quartet had been replaced by a lively band, but their cheerful music couldn't quite dispel the underlying tension in the room. Guests were clustered in small groups, their conversations punctuated by forced laughter. Everyone was playing their part in the grand theater of the wedding, but the script felt wrong. Amanda was at the center of it all, a radiant but brittle star. She was holding onto Ethan's arm, her grip a little too tight, her smile a little too wide. She was acting as if their earlier argument had never happened, a testament to her remarkable ability to ignore any reality that didn't suit her. She was glowing, her arrogance at its absolute peak, certain that she had won. Ethan, by her side, looked pale and strained. He was going through the motions, nodding and smiling at guests, but his eyes were distant. The conflict was still raging within him, a silent war between his love for Amanda and his deep-seated respect for Marcus. He felt a profound sense of dread, a feeling that he was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the ground was crumbling beneath his feet. Sophie, the waitress, watched them from the edge of the room. She kept her eyes on the main entrance, a sense of anticipation humming beneath her skin. She didn't know what the quiet driver was planning, but she felt certain that something was about to happen. She had seen the strength in his eyes, the quiet confidence that belied his simple uniform. Then she saw him. Marcus Reed re-entered the reception hall through a side service door. He moved with a quiet purpose, his steps measured and calm. He was no longer wearing the chauffeur's jacket. He had removed it, revealing a crisp white button-down shirt beneath. In his hand, he held a simple, elegant envelope, the one she had seen him with in the car. He didn't look at anyone. His gaze was fixed on the stage at the front of the room where the MC was preparing to make an announcement. The camera of the story was tightening. The various players were all in place. Amanda, the arrogant queen, was oblivious on her throne. Ethan, the conflicted prince, was trapped by her side. And Marcus, the hidden king, was about to make his move. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with unspoken truths and impending revelations. The cheerful music played on, a jarring soundtrack to the drama that was about to unfold. The reveal was coming, and it was going to be spectacular. The MC, a cheerful man in a tuxedo, tapped the microphone. The sound echoed through the hall, quieting the scattered conversations. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" he said, his voice booming with practiced enthusiasm. "We have reached that special time in the evening for toasts, and I'm told a very special gift presentation for our lovely bride and groom." A polite round of applause rippled through the room. Amanda beamed, her face a mask of smug anticipation. She leaned over and whispered to Ethan, "This must be Daddy's surprise." "He told me he had one more thing for us." She squeezed his arm, expecting him to share her excitement. But Ethan just stared at the stage, his face grim. The MC continued. "At this time, we have a gift from a very dear friend of the Groom's family. A man who has been a pillar of support in Ethan's life." Amanda straightened up, a proud smile on her face. She smoothed down her dress, ready for her moment in the spotlight. She imagined her father being called to the stage, another grand gesture to prove their family's superior status. "So, would you please join me in welcoming to the stage?" The MC paused for dramatic effect. "Mr. Marcus Reed." A wave of confusion washed over the room. The name meant nothing to most of the guests. They looked around, murmuring to each other. "Who's Marcus Reed? Is he one of Ethan's relatives?" Amanda's smile vanished. Her face went blank with shock, then twisted into a scowl of disbelief. "Marcus Reed?" she whispered, her voice sharp. "The driver? This has to be a joke." Her father, Mr. Dalton, looked equally bewildered. He shook his head, his face turning a shade of purple. Then from the side of the room, Marcus stepped forward. He walked toward the stage, his steps unhurried and confident. He was no longer the invisible chauffeur. All eyes were on him. The guests fell silent, a collective gasp rippling through the crowd as they recognized him. It was the man from the courtyard, the man the bride had so cruelly dismissed. He was wearing a simple white shirt, but he carried himself with an authority that no uniform could bestow. Amanda turned pale. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a pasty white against her brilliant dress. "What is he doing?" she hissed at Ethan. "Make him stop!" But Ethan wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on Marcus, and for the first time all day, a genuine smile spread across his face. It was a look of pure relief, of dawning understanding. He let go of Amanda's arm and took a step forward, his attention completely captivated by the man walking onto the stage. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. The atmosphere in the room had shifted in an instant, from festive celebration to stunned, breathless anticipation. The man everyone had ignored was now the center of attention, and no one, least of all the bride, knew what was about to happen. Marcus reached the stage and stood beside the slightly bewildered MC. He didn't take the microphone. He didn't need to. The room was so quiet that his calm, steady voice carried easily to every corner. He looked directly at Ethan, his expression warm and paternal. "Ethan," he began, "your father was my best friend. Before he passed, I made him a promise that I would always look out for you, that I would help you build a life he would be proud of." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Amanda's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She stared at Marcus, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Marcus held up the elegant envelope he had been carrying. "Today, on your wedding day, I wanted to give you something to help you on that journey. A foundation for the future you and your new family will build together." He opened the envelope and took out a set of car keys attached to a simple leather fob. He held them up for everyone to see. "Ethan, this is for you." He then handed the keys and the envelope to the MC, who looked down at the documents inside. The MC's eyes widened. He fumbled with the microphone, his professional composure completely shattered. "Ladies and gentlemen," he stammered, his voice filled with awe. These are the ownership papers for a brand new, fully customized 2023 Bentley Flying Spur. The vehicle is registered in the name of Ethan Parker." A collective gasp, louder and more shocked than before, filled the hall. The name of the car, a symbol of unimaginable luxury, hung in the air. The value of such a gift was staggering, far beyond anything anyone had expected. Guests turned to each other, their faces a mixture of disbelief and astonishment. The price of that car was more than some of them made in several years. Amanda froze. Her body went rigid, her eyes locked on the keys in the MC's hand. The car the smelly driver had been driving, was a Bentley? And it was Ethan's? The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. But Marcus wasn't finished. In a single, deliberate movement, he reached up and unbuttoned his chauffeur's shirt. He shrugged it off, letting it fall to the stage floor. Underneath, he was wearing a perfectly tailored, expensive-looking suit jacket and a silk tie. The transformation was stunning. The humble driver was gone. In his place stood a man of immense power and quiet confidence. He was no longer Marcus the chauffeur. He was Marcus Reed, the millionaire owner, the secret benefactor, who had been hiding in plain sight. The room erupted in a cacophony of whispers and exclamations. Jaws literally dropped. People stood up from their seats to get a better look. The truth was now undeniable, laid bare for everyone to see. Sophie, watching from the back of the room, felt a triumphant smile spread across her face. This was better than any confrontation. This was justice, delivered with surgical precision. Ethan walked toward the stage as if in a daze. He looked from the car keys to Marcus's transformed appearance, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place in his mind. He reached the stage and threw his arms around Marcus, hugging him tightly. The crowd could hear him whisper, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't have to do this. You've already done so much." Marcus hugged him back, patting his back firmly. "Your father would be so proud of the man you've become, son." He then leaned in and whispered something only Ethan could hear. Ethan nodded, his eyes shining with tears. He turned to Marcus and said, his voice now clear and strong for the whole room to hear, "You're the father I never had." The raw, genuine emotion of the moment silenced the last of the whispers. The grand reveal was complete, and its fallout was just beginning. Amanda stood rooted to the spot, a statue of white lace and shattered pride. The room was spinning. The shocked faces of her guests, the whispers, the sight of Ethan hugging that man. It was all a nightmare. Her mind replayed the scene in the courtyard over and over, her own voice dripping with scorn. Park far, you smell. The words now echoed in her head like a death knell. She had humiliated a man who had just gifted her and her new husband a car worth more than her father's house. She had mocked a millionaire. She started to stammer, desperate to say something, to fix this. I don't understand, she managed, her voice a weak, trembling whisper that was lost in the stunned silence of the room. Ethan, what is this? Her father, Mr. Dalton, pushed his way through the crowd to her side. His face was a mottled red and white, a mask of fury and humiliation. This is some kind of trick, he blustered, his voice loud and accusatory. Some kind of disgusting prank. He pointed a shaking finger at Marcus, who was now standing calmly beside Ethan on the stage. Marcus looked down at him, his expression unreadable. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. He simply spoke, his words cutting through the tension with chilling clarity. There is no trick, Mr. Dalton, he said. He then looked directly at Amanda, his gaze level and unwavering. Your daughter, however, seemed to be under a misapprehension earlier today. She instructed me to, and I quote, "Park far, you smell." He repeated her exact words, the ones she had spoken so loudly, so proudly for everyone to hear. Hearing them again in this new context was devastating. A fresh wave of gasps and horrified murmurs swept through the room. The guests who had chuckled before now stared at the floor, their faces burning with shame. The bridesmaids who had egged her on now took a collective step back, distancing themselves from her as if she were contagious. Amanda's humiliation was complete and absolute. She was exposed, her petty cruelty laid bare for the entire world to see. There was nowhere to hide. Ethan stepped forward, his face set like stone. All the conflict, all the indecision was gone. In its place was a cold, hard certainty. He looked at Amanda, and for the first time he saw her not as the beautiful, confident woman he loved, but as a cruel, shallow stranger. Amanda, he said, his voice resonating with a newfound authority. Marcus is my family. He raised me. He has shown me more kindness and generosity than I have ever known. And you treated him like he was nothing, less than nothing. He took a deep breath, the finality of his next words hanging in the air. Respect, he said, his voice clear and unwavering, is worth more than a wedding dress. It's worth more than a car or a big house or all the money your father has, and you don't have any of it. Amanda finally broke. A sob escaped her lips. Ethan, please, she begged, tears now streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. I didn't know. If I had known who he was. That's the point, Amanda. Ethan cut her off, his voice laced with bitter disappointment. It shouldn't matter who he is. You shouldn't have to know someone is a millionaire to treat them with basic human decency. He looked around at the silent, watching crowd, then back at the woman he was supposed to spend his life with. He saw the truth, stark and unavoidable. She hadn't fallen in love with him. She had approved of what she thought he was. And she had just failed the most important test of her life. He knew in that gut-wrenching moment that it was over. He had lost a bride, but he had just saved himself. The MC, still flustered but sensing the gravity of the moment, stepped back to the microphone. He cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of control over the imploding event. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, but Ethan held up a hand to stop him. He walked to the center of the stage, standing beside Marcus, and faced the crowd. He was no longer the nervous, uncertain Groom. He was a man who had made a decision, and it had given him strength. I'm sorry, everyone, he said, his voice ringing with conviction. But this wedding cannot continue. The guests gasped. This was no longer just a dramatic reveal. It was the complete dissolution of a marriage before it had even begun. Amanda let out a strangled cry. Ethan, no! You can't do this! He turned to her, his expression a mixture of sadness and resolve. I can, Amanda, and I have to. This marriage was supposed to be built on love and respect. It's clear now that we have very different definitions of what that means. He then laid out his terms, his voice firm. This wedding is halted until you apologize, not just to me, and not just because you're embarrassed. You need to apologize to Marcus sincerely for the way you treated him. And you need to apologize to my family for the way you've belittled them. You need to apologize to every person in this room you believe is beneath you. The ultimatum hung in the air, a final chance for redemption. All eyes turned to Amanda. She stood there, trembling, her face a mess of tears and ruined makeup. For a moment, it seemed like she might do it, that she might swallow her pride and try to salvage the wreckage of her perfect day. But her arrogance was too deeply ingrained. To apologize would be to admit she was wrong, and in Amanda's world, she was never wrong. She looked from Ethan's resolute face to the disapproving stares of the guests. The shame was too much. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible. Then louder, her voice cracking with rage and humiliation. "No! I will not." That was it, the final, damning word. Ethan nodded slowly, a look of profound sorrow on his face. "Then there's nothing more to say." He turned his back on her. The rejection was absolute. Amanda stared at him, her mouth agape, before she finally broke. She let out a wrenching sob, turned, and fled. She ran through the silent crowd, her beautiful, expensive wedding dress trailing behind her like a shroud. She pushed past the guests, who had only an hour ago been clamoring for her attention. She ran out of the reception hall, her cries echoing behind her. Her bridesmaids, the ones who had laughed at her cruel jokes, exchanged panicked glances. They hesitated for a moment. Then, one by one, they turned their backs and melted back into the crowd, abandoning their fallen queen. Sophie, watching it all unfold, felt a profound sense of awe. It wasn't just a wedding that had ended. It was a reign of petty tyranny. Justice, swift and undeniable, had just been served. The moment Amanda fled the room, a strange thing happened. The thick, suffocating tension that had gripped the reception hall seemed to break. It was as if a storm cloud had finally passed, leaving clean, fresh air in its wake. For a few seconds there was a stunned silence, and then someone started to clap. It was a slow, hesitant applause at first, but it was quickly joined by others. Soon the entire room was applauding, not for the failed wedding, but for the stand Ethan had just taken. They were clapping for the quiet dignity of Marcus, and for the triumph of character over cruelty. The MC, seeing the direction things were heading, quickly adapted. "Well, ladies and gentlemen," he said into the microphone, his cheerful tone returning, "it seems we are no longer celebrating a wedding, but we are. Celebrating integrity, family, and friendship. The bar is open, and the band is ready to play." The band, taking their cue, launched into an upbeat, soulful tune. The atmosphere in the room transformed instantly. The stiff formality of the wedding reception dissolved, replaced by a genuine, warm celebration. The focus of the event shifted entirely. It was no longer about Amanda Sterling and her perfect day. It was about Ethan Parker and the family, both blood and chosen, that stood by him. Marcus was escorted from the stage, not as a pariah, but as a guest of honor. Ethan's mother, a kind woman with tears of pride in her eyes, hugged him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for looking after my boy." Ethan led Marcus to the head table, the one that had been reserved for the bridal party, and insisted he take the seat of honor right beside him. Guests who had previously ignored Marcus now came up to him, shaking his hand, their eyes filled with a newfound respect. They wanted to talk to him, to hear his story, to apologize for not seeing him for who he was. Ethan made his way through the crowd until he found Sophie. She was standing by the service station, still trying to process everything she had witnessed. "Excuse me," Ethan said, and she turned, startled. "I saw you," he continued, a grateful smile on his face. "I saw you go out to the parking lot to bring Marcus water." My mother saw it too. In a room full of people who chose to look away, you chose to be kind. Thank you." Sophie was speechless. I didn't do anything," she stammered. "You did more than you know," Ethan said. "Please don't work any more tonight. Join us. Be our guest." He personally led her to the main table and introduced her to his family, seating her among them. For the first time all day, Sophie felt like she truly belonged. As the evening went on, the party became a true celebration. People danced, they laughed, they shared stories. Ethan, free from the weight of his toxic relationship, was like a new person. He was relaxed, happy, and surrounded by people who genuinely cared for him. He made a short, heartfelt speech, not about a failed marriage, but about the importance of the values Marcus had taught him. Humility, kindness, and judging people by their character, not their clothes or their job. The absence of Amanda and her family was barely noticed. The space they had occupied with their arrogance and negativity was now filled with warmth and authenticity. It was a new beginning, born from the ashes of a lie. The reception had been saved, transformed from a hollow spectacle into a meaningful gathering that celebrated the things that truly matter. In the end, the story was not about a wedding at all. It was about value. True wealth is measured not by money or titles or the shine on a luxury car. It is measured by the respect you show to others, especially to those you believe have nothing to offer you. The bride, Amanda, lost everything that day. She lost a husband, she lost her dignity, and she lost the respect of everyone she had tried so hard to impress. She lost it all because she could not see past her own pride, because she judged a man's worth by his uniform instead of his character. Her beautiful dress became a symbol of her ugly soul. The groom, Ethan, gained more than a gift. He lost a toxic partner, but he gained a priceless lesson that would guide the rest of his future. He learned that true love cannot exist without respect, and that standing up for what is right is more important than keeping up appearances. And Marcus, the hidden giant, reminded the world of a simple, powerful truth. Dignity cannot be mocked. It cannot be diminished by insults or scorn. It can only be revealed. He showed everyone that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful, and that true strength lies not in showing off your wealth, but in the steadfastness of your character. The chauffeur who was told he smelled left a lasting fragrance in that hall, the scent of integrity, a scent far more valuable than any perfume money could buy. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.